The cafe on Worth Avenue in Palm Beach, Florida, was the kind of place where a single espresso cost $32 and nobody thought twice about it. Crystal water glasses sat on white linen tablecloths. The silverware was polished to a mirror shine every morning before the doors opened. The clientele was old money, tech money, trust fund money, and the kind of money that never had to explain itself. Bentleys and Rolls-Royces lined the curb outside like a luxury car dealership. The air smelled like fresh orchids and imported pastries and quiet, suffocating wealth. Clarabelle moved between the tables with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this job long enough to become invisible. 24 years old, black, fair-skinned with tight, natural coils pulled into a low bun at the nape of her neck. She wore the cafe's standard uniform, a pressed white blouse and black slacks, but underneath the uniform was a $9 sundress she had thrifted for her walk home after shift. Her shoes were scuffed at the toes. Her watch was broken. She wore it anyway, because her mother had given it to her. She was the kind of woman people noticed without meaning to. There was something about the way she carried herself. Quiet, graceful, dignified in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. She said please and thank you to every customer, even the ones who never looked at her face. She cleared tables without being asked. She refilled water glasses before they hit the halfway mark. And sometimes, when the cafe was slow and the afternoon light came through the windows just right, she hummed. That was the thing about Clarabelle that most of these wealthy customers would never know. She had a voice, not just a nice voice, not just a pretty voice, a voice that could stop time. She hummed old gospel melodies her mother used to sing in the kitchen at 5 in the morning before leaving for her housekeeping shift. She hummed Aretha Franklin and Etta James and sometimes songs she made up herself, melodies that lived in her chest like second heartbeats. More than once, a customer had paused mid-bite, fork suspended in the air, and listened without knowing why. But nobody at the cafe on Worth Avenue knew her name. She was just the waitress, the quiet one, the one who smiled even when nobody smiled back. 3 tables away from where Clarabelle was clearing dishes, a man sat alone. Park Min-jun did not look like he belonged in this cafe. He looked like he owned it, 31 years old, Korean, tall, with the kind of lean, disciplined build that came from years of martial arts training and the sort of rigid self-control that is taught, not inherited. His dark hair was cut short and precise. His jaw was sharp. His eyes were sharper. He sat with the stillness of a man who had learned early in life that the most powerful person in any room is the one who moves the least. He was reading something on a tablet, a glass of still water beside him, untouched. 2 men in dark suits stood several feet behind his table, positioned so casually that most people would never notice them. But if you looked carefully, you would see the earpieces, the way their eyes moved in slow, constant sweeps across the cafe, the way their hands stayed loose and ready at their sides. Personal security. The kind of security that comes with being the acting head of the Park family empire. The Park family was not a secret. Not exactly. Their names sat on the side of skyscrapers in Seoul, Tokyo, and New York. Park Capital Group controlled a vast, legitimate conglomerate that included luxury real estate developments, 5-star hotel chains across the United States and Asia, and a private equity firm that managed billions in assets. Min-jun ran the American arm of the empire from their corporate headquarters in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was in Palm Beach to close a deal on a waterfront resort acquisition, and he had chosen this cafe because it was quiet, and the espresso was acceptable, and nobody here would bother him. He was not the kind of man who sought attention. He was the kind of man attention sought. At the table closest to where Clarabelle was working sat a man named Bryce Whitmore, late 20s, sandy blonde hair that cost $300 to look that carelessly tousled, a polo shirt with the collar popped, a watch that screamed money without whispering taste. Bryce was the heir to a regional hotel chain his father had built from a single motel in Tampa into a mid-tier empire of 37 properties across the Southeast. He had never built anything himself. He had never worked a real job. He had been born into comfort, raised in privilege, and shaped into the kind of man who mistook cruelty for confidence. He was drunk on Risset. At noon, his 2 friends, both on his family's payroll in vague consulting roles that required no actual consulting, laughed at everything he said. They were professional laughers. It was part of the job description. Bryce was telling a story about a yacht party in Miami. It was not a good story. It involved too many brand names and not enough self-awareness. But his friends laughed like it was the funniest thing they had ever heard, and Bryce's voice got louder with each glass of rosé, filling the cafe with the sound of unearned confidence. Clarabelle approached to clear the empty glasses from his table. She said, "Excuse me," her voice soft and polite. She reached for an empty glass near Bryce's elbow. Bryce, mid-gesture in his terrible story, swung his arm back and knocked the tray clean out of her hands. The crash was spectacular. Crystal glasses shattered on the patio stone. A plate cracked in half. A fork skittered across the floor and stopped at the foot of a woman at the next table who flinched like she had been slapped. The entire cafe went silent. Every head turned. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Clarabelle immediately dropped to her knees. She started picking up the broken pieces with her bare hands, not even noticing when a shard of glass nicked her finger and drew a thin line of blood. She apologized. Of course she apologized. That was what she had learned to do. Survive by shrinking, take up less space, be smaller, be quieter, be sorry for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I am so sorry, sir. I will get this cleaned up right away. I am so sorry." Bryce looked down at her, not with concern, not with embarrassment, with disgust. "What is wrong with you?" he said, loud enough for every table to hear. "Are you blind? Are you stupid? You don't belong in a place like this. Look at you. Look at this mess." His friends shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The cafe manager, a man in a gray suit who had seen the entire thing from behind the host's stand, looked away. He looked directly away from Clarabelle, on her knees with blood on her finger, and he looked away because Bryce Whitmore's family spent $40,000 a year at this establishment, and Clarabelle was replaceable. Clarabelle stood. She held the broken tray against her chest like a shield. A piece of glass was embedded in the cork lining, and she could feel it pressing against her collarbone through her blouse. Her cheek was hot with humiliation, but she kept her voice steady. "I apologize, sir. I will have this taken care of." And then Bryce slapped her. Open palm, full force, across her left cheek. The sound cracked through the air like a whip, sharp and violent and unmistakable. Clarabelle's head snapped to the right. The broken tray fell from her hands and hit the ground a second time. She stumbled back a step, caught herself, and pressed her hand to her face. Nobody moved. 50 people. 50 wealthy, educated, powerful people, and not a single one of them moved. A woman at a nearby table gasped and covered her mouth with manicured fingers. An older man in a linen jacket looked down at his plate. A couple near the railing exchanged a glance that said this is terrible, but also said this is not our problem. The cafe manager took one step forward and then stopped, frozen by the same cowardice that had made him look away 30 seconds ago. Clarabelle stood there, her hand on her cheek, her eyes wide, not with tears, not yet, with that specific searing shock that comes when violence arrives without warning, when the world proves in a single second that you are not safe, that you have never been safe, that politeness and dignity and keeping your head down are not armor. They are nothing. Bryce looked at his hand like he was surprised by what it had done. Then the surprise faded and the smirk returned. His friends stared at the ground. 3 tables away, Park Min-jun set his tablet down. He did it slowly, deliberately, the way a man sets down a weapon he no longer needs because he has decided to become the weapon himself. He stood. He buttoned a single button on his jacket. He did not hurry. The 2 security guards behind him took one step forward in unison, reading his movement, preparing to follow. Min-jun raised a single finger without turning around. They stopped. He walked toward Bryce's table. His footsteps were the only sound in the cafe. Every eye in the place tracked him. Something about the way he moved communicated danger without aggression. It was the walk of a man who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to make someone afraid. He reached Bryce's table and stopped. Bryce looked up at him with the glazed arrogance of a man who had never faced a consequence. There was rosé on his lip. His collar was still popped. He had no idea what was standing in front of him. "Can I help you, buddy?" Bryce said. Min-jun did not answer. He looked at Clarabelle. She was still holding her cheek, still standing in the wreckage of broken glass, still bleeding from the cut on her finger. Their eyes met for just a moment. Then Minjun turned back to Bryce. He pulled out his phone, made a single call, spoke in Korean, calm, precise, barely above a murmur. The call lasted 11 seconds. He hung up and slid the phone back into his jacket pocket. Then he spoke, in perfect, unaccented English. His voice was low and even and carried the weight of absolute certainty. My name is Park Minjun. I'm the CEO of Park Capital Group. In the 11 seconds I was on that phone call, I authorized the hostile acquisition of the Whitmore Hotel Group. Every property, every asset, every brand license, every parking lot and linen closet and minibar. My acquisitions team has had your family's portfolio flagged as undervalued for 4 months. I just gave the go-ahead. By the time you finish your glass of rosé, your family will not own a single room. Bryce laughed. It was a reflex. The laugh of a man who hears something so impossible that the only response is disbelief. Minjun did not blink. Call your father. The laugh died. Something in Minjun's voice, something in the absolute absence of bluff in his expression, made Bryce's hand move before his brain could stop it. He pulled out his phone. He dialed. The cafe was dead silent. 50 people watched Bryce Whitmore hold his phone to his ear and wait. The color left his face in stages, first his cheeks, then his forehead, then his lips. His mouth opened slightly. His hand began to shake. The phone slid an inch down the side of his face because his palm was suddenly slick with sweat. He hung up. He stared at Minjun. His eyes were wide and wet and filled with the sudden, terrible understanding that the world he had always taken for granted had just been pulled out from under him like a tablecloth. Minjun leaned in, close enough that only Bryce could hear. His voice dropped to something just above a whisper. You are going to apologize to this woman. On your knees, right now, in front of everyone, or by tomorrow morning your family will not be able to afford a room in their own hotels. Bryce Whitmore, heir to the Whitmore Hotel Group, the man who had just slapped a waitress for sport in front of 50 people who did nothing, sank to his knees on the patio stone. His pressed chinos scraped against the ground. His friends stared at him with their mouths open. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple and dripped onto the stone. He looked up at Clarabelle. His voice cracked like a boy's. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Please, I am sorry. The cafe was so quiet you could hear the ocean 3 blocks away. Minjun straightened. He turned to Clarabelle. For the first time since he had stood from his table, his expression changed. The hardness in his jaw softened, just barely, just at the edges, like ice beginning to thaw from the outside in. Are you all right? He asked. Clarabelle looked at this man she had never seen before. This man who had just dismantled another man's entire world in 60 seconds because that man had put his hands on her. She was still holding her cheek. Her finger was still bleeding. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She nodded slowly. I am fine, she whispered. Minjun held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he said, quietly, You should not have to be fine with that. He turned, walked back to his table, sat down, and picked up his tablet. As if nothing had happened. As if he had not just rearranged the economic landscape of a family dynasty in the time it takes to brew a cup of coffee. Clarabelle watched him. She stood there in the broken glass and the silence and the stunned stares of 50 people, and she watched this stranger return to his table and his glass of water and his quiet, terrifying calm. She did not know his name yet. She did not know that the Park family controlled more wealth than some countries. She did not know that this man, who had just defended her without raising his voice, was the head of one of the most powerful business empires in the world. But she knew, with the certainty of a woman who had spent her whole life reading silence, that something had just shifted. Something fundamental, something that could not be unshifted. She picked up the broken tray. She walked back to the kitchen. She washed the blood off her finger under cold water and pressed a paper towel against the cut until it stopped bleeding. She leaned against the stainless steel counter and closed her eyes and breathed. She did not know that this moment, this single violent, humiliating, astonishing moment, had just set off a chain of events that would pull her into a world of power, loyalty, danger. and a love so deep it would test every single thing she had ever believed about herself. All she knew was that a stranger had seen her, not looked at her, seen her, and the world suddenly felt different because of it. Now let me ask you something. If a complete stranger just destroyed a man's entire empire because that man put his hands on you, would you walk away and forget it ever happened, or would you need to know who he was and why he did it? Tell me in the comments. And if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, go ahead and hit the subscribe button right now. Now, let's continue. The next evening, Clarabelle showed up for her second job the way she always did. Tired, quiet, carrying something heavy behind her eyes that she never talked about. The Indigo Room was a small live music lounge tucked into a side street in West Palm Beach. It was not fancy. The lighting was dim and warm, the chairs were mismatched, and the stage was barely a stage at all. Just a slightly raised wooden platform with a single microphone stand and a stool. The walls were covered in framed photographs of jazz musicians and handwritten poems pinned with thumbtacks. It smelled like old wood and cheap wine, and something that might have been incense or might have been hope. Every Thursday night, local artists performed there. Poets who read from crumpled notebook pages, guitarists with calloused fingers and day jobs, singers who had never been signed and maybe never would be. This was their church. Their one night a week to be something more than their paychecks. Clarabelle had been singing here every Thursday for 2 years. No stage name, no social media, no manager. She just showed up, sang 3 songs, and went home. She never recorded her performances. She never posted clips online. She sang because singing was the only thing in her life that made her feel like she was standing on solid ground. And her voice was something that did not make sense. It was not trained. She had never taken a lesson. She had never been inside a recording studio. She had never had a vocal coach tell her where to breathe or how to shape a note. Her voice was raw, deep, rich, textured with something that felt ancient, like it had been passed down through generations of women who sang through their pain because crying was not enough. When Clarabelle sang, the room changed. Conversations stopped. Bartenders froze with bottles in their hands. Strangers looked at each other with that specific expression that says, "Are you hearing what I am hearing?" The regulars at the Indigo Room were protective of her. They treated her like a secret. They brought friends and family on Thursday nights just to watch the look on their faces when Clarabelle opened her mouth. An older woman named Miss Doreen, who came every single week and sat in the same chair by the door, once told the lounge owner that listening to Clarabelle sing was the closest thing to prayer she had experienced since her husband passed. Clarabelle did not know any of this. She did not know that she was extraordinary. She knew she could sing. She did not know she could change people. On this particular Thursday, the bruise on her cheek from Bryce's slap had faded to a dull yellow that she covered with drugstore concealer. She had not told anyone at the Indigo Room what happened. She did not want pity. She wanted to sing. What she did not know was that Park Min-jun was 2 doors down. He was at a restaurant called Meridian, finishing a dinner meeting with a business associate. The deal they discussed was routine. Another property acquisition. Another set of numbers. Min-jun handled it with the mechanical efficiency of a man who could do this work in his sleep and sometimes felt like he did. The meeting ended early. His associate left. Min-jun sat alone at the table for a moment, looking at nothing, feeling the specific exhaustion that comes not from physical labor, but from the weight of being needed by everyone and known by no one. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the exit with Di-ho, his head of security, beside him. Di-ho was Korean, mid-40s, built like a concrete wall wrapped in a suit. He had been with Min-jun for 12 years. He did not talk much. He did not need to. They stepped onto the sidewalk. The night air was warm and humid, thick with the smell of jasmine and salt from the coast. Min-jun turned toward the waiting car, and then he stopped. A voice, coming through the open door of the lounge next to the restaurant. A woman's voice, singing something slow and aching and impossibly beautiful. Min-jun stopped mid-stride. His body went completely still, the way it did when he encountered something that required his full attention. Di-ho walked 3 more steps before realizing Min-jun was no longer beside him. He turned back. Min-jun was standing on the sidewalk, eyes slightly narrowed, listening with an intensity that Di-ho had only ever seen him direct at billion-dollar negotiations. Without a word, Minjun walked into the indigo room. The place was small, maybe 40 people. The lighting was so low he could barely make out the faces in the crowd. But on the stage, in a single pool of amber light, was a woman he recognized. Clarabelle. She was sitting on the stool, her eyes half closed, singing a song she had written about her mother. It was about watching someone you love work themselves into exhaustion and not being able to stop it. About a woman named Lorraine who cleaned hotel rooms for 23 years and came home every night with her hands cracked and her knees swollen and her spirit somehow, impossibly, unbroken. About a little girl who used to sit on the kitchen floor and listen to that woman hum gospel hymns at 5 in the morning while packing lunches in brown paper bags. The song was devastating. 2 women in the front row were crying silently, tears running down their cheeks without shame. A man at the bar had his head down, gripping his glass like it was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. Miss Doreen by the door had her eyes closed and her lips moving in what might have been prayer. Minjun stood in the back and did not move for the entire song. He did not check his phone. He did not look around the room. He did not do anything except listen with everything he had. And somewhere inside his chest, in a place he had kept locked since he was 19 years old, something cracked open. When Clarabelle finished, the room erupted. Not in polite applause. In the kind of raw, cathartic response that comes from people who feel like they have just been handed something sacred. They clapped and wiped their eyes and looked at each other with the stunned gratitude of survivors. Then Clarabelle opened her eyes and saw him. The man from the cafe, standing in the back of her lounge, perfectly still, watching her with an expression she could not read. Her breath caught. Her hand tightened around the microphone. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the 2 of them across a crowded room, and everything else became background noise. She finished her set, 2 more songs, both of which she barely remembered singing because her awareness kept returning to the figure in the back corner who had not moved. After the last note, she set the microphone on the stand and stepped off the tiny stage on shaking legs. He was waiting for her near the bar. Up close, he was different than she remembered. At the cafe, he had been all sharp edges and cold authority. Here, in the dim warmth of the indigo room, the edges were softer. He was still tall, still immaculately dressed, still radiating the kind of quiet power that made the air around him feel denser. But his eyes were different. They were looking at her the way people look at something they are afraid to touch because they know it is precious. "Your voice," he said, and then he stopped, like the sentence had run into a wall. He tried again. That was extraordinary. His voice was lower than she remembered, quieter. She realized he was choosing his words with the same precision he probably used for everything. This was a man who did not waste language. "Thank you," Clarabelle said. She was guarded, arms folded loosely across her chest. "I never got to properly thank you for what you did at the cafe." "No thanks are necessary." "It is necessary to me. Nobody else moved. You were the only one." He was quiet for a moment. What happened to you should never happen to anyone. There was a pause, a long one. The kind of pause where 2 people are reading each other's silence and finding entire stories written there. "Have you ever performed professionally?" he asked. She almost laughed. "No, I do not have the connections for that, or the money. I just sing because it is the only thing that makes me feel like myself." He nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. It was plain white. No name, just a phone number in black ink. "If you ever want an opportunity to share your voice with more people," he said, "call that number." He placed the card on the bar beside her hand. Their fingers were inches apart. Neither of them moved. "I am not asking for anything," he said, as if reading the caution in her eyes. "I am offering something. What you do with it is entirely your decision." Then he turned and walked out of the indigo room without looking back. Dee-ho fell into step beside him. The door closed behind them. Clarabelle picked up the card. She turned it over, nothing on the back, just a phone number and the weight of possibility. She did not call the number, not that night. She put the card in her wallet and walked home to her studio apartment and lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow, lazy circles. For the first time in years, she fell asleep thinking about someone. Not about what he had done for her, about the way he had listened. Like her voice was the answer to a question he had been carrying for a long time. Later that night, in his penthouse suite at a resort in Palm Beach, Min-jun was on a video call with his younger sister, Soo-yeon, in Seoul. She was 27, sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal, and the only person on earth who could make Min-jun laugh without trying. She asked him how America was. He said fine. She asked about the deal. He said it was on track. She asked, the way she always did if he had met anyone, any woman who had caught his attention, any sign of life behind the corporate machinery of his existence. Min-jun paused. The pause lasted 3 seconds, but Soo-yeon, who had known her brother her entire life, heard everything in those 3 seconds. "Oh my God," she said. "Who is she?" "Nobody," Min-jun said. "You just paused. You never pause. Park Min-jun does not pause. Who is she?" "Good night, Soo-yeon." He ended the call, but the pause remained, hanging in the air of the penthouse like a note that had not finished resonating. Di-ho, who had been standing near the door and had overheard everything, raised one eyebrow. He had known Min-jun for 12 years. He had watched him negotiate with presidents and stare down corporate rivals and sit through 16-hour board meetings without showing a flicker of emotion. He had never, in all those years, seen him pause like that about anyone. A week passed. Clarabelle did not call the number. She was too proud, too cautious, too shaped by a lifetime of learning that things that seem too good to be true always are. She kept working at the cafe on Worth Avenue, where Bryce Whitmore's table now sat permanently empty. She heard through the kitchen staff that his family had lost their entire hotel chain in a hostile acquisition. They had relocated out of state. Nobody said the name Whitmore anymore. It was like he had been erased. She kept singing at the Indigo Room. She kept living her small, careful, paycheck-to-paycheck life. She kept the business card in her wallet, tucked behind her expired library card, and every night before bed, she took it out and looked at it and put it back. Then something happened that made the decision for her. Reggie, the owner of the Indigo Room, called a meeting with his staff on a Tuesday afternoon. He stood behind the bar with his hands in his pockets and his eyes red, and told them the building had been sold. A development company had purchased the entire block. The Indigo Room was closing in 30 days. The room went quiet. The bartender, a woman named Yolanda who had worked there for 8 years, put her face in her hands. The sound guy unplugged his equipment without a word. Reggie apologized. He said he had tried everything. He said this place was his dream and watching it die was the hardest thing he had ever done. Clarabelle stood in the back of the room and felt the floor drop out from under her. The Indigo Room was the only stage she had ever known. The only place where her voice existed outside the walls of her apartment. The only place where she felt real. On her last night performing there, the place was packed. Word had spread. Everyone who had ever loved Clarabelle's voice came to say goodbye. Regulars who had not missed a Thursday in years. Friends who brought friends who brought friends. Miss Doreen was in her chair by the door, wearing her best dress, clutching a handkerchief. Clarabelle sang 5 songs instead of 3. The last one was a song about losing the only home you have ever known. She wrote it that morning on the bus ride over, scribbling lyrics on the back of a grocery receipt. It was rough and unpolished and absolutely devastating. When she finished, the room gave her a standing ovation. Reggie was in the back corner, wiping his eyes with a bar towel. Miss Doreen stood up and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Baby, you are too good for this little room anyway. Go be great." After the show, Clarabelle sat on the curb outside. Alone. The street was quiet. The neon sign above the Indigo Room buzzed and flickered. She held her phone in one hand. She pulled the business card from her wallet with the other. She had lost her stage. She was working 2 jobs and barely covering rent on a studio apartment that smelled like mildew. She had no savings, no family in Florida. Her mother, Lorraine, had passed away 3 years ago from a heart that simply gave out after decades of too much work and not enough rest. Her father had left when she was 7. She had no one. She dialed the number. The phone rang twice. A woman's voice answered, professional and warm. "Office of Park Min-jun, CEO of Park Capital Group. How may I direct your call?" Clarabelle's finger hovered over the end call button. Park Capital Group. She had heard that name. Everyone had heard that name. Skyscrapers, hotels, billions of dollars. A level of power so far above her daily reality it might as well have been another dimension. She asked for Minjun. The woman asked for her name. Clarabelle gave it. There was a brief pause. Then the woman said, with genuine warmth in her voice, "One moment, Miss Clarabelle. He has been expecting your call." He has been expecting your call. That sentence went through her like an electric current. Within 48 hours, Clarabelle was on a first-class flight to Scottsdale, Arizona. She had never flown first class. She had barely flown at all. She sat in the wide leather seat with her hands folded in her lap and her thrifted sundress and her broken watch, and she looked out the window at the clouds and tried not to feel like she was dreaming. Park Capital Group's U.S. headquarters was a campus of glass and desert stone, set against the red rock landscape of the Sonoran Desert. There was a fountain in the courtyard. People in tailored clothing moved with purpose along covered walkways. Everything was clean lines and quiet authority. Clarabelle walked through the lobby in her nicest outfit, a clean white blouse and dark jeans, and felt like she had landed on another planet. She was brought into a conference room with views that stretched to the horizon. Minjun was there. He stood when she entered. He was wearing a navy suit with no tie, and he looked at her with an expression that was professional on the surface, but held something warmer underneath, something he was trying very hard to keep in check. He was not alone. Sitting at the table was a woman named Priya Mehta, mid-30s, sharp dark eyes, confident posture, a pen behind her ear and a laptop open in front of her. Priya was the head of Park Capital's newly launched entertainment and media division, and she radiated the energy of a woman who had fought for every seat she had ever occupied and was not about to apologize for being in any of them. Minjun explained. The Park family was expanding beyond real estate and finance. They were investing in content, music, and live entertainment. They were looking for artists, not manufactured ones, not products of assembly line record deals, real artists with authentic voices and original material. Told Clarabelle he wanted to offer her a development deal, not a record contract, something different, a full artist development package, vocal coaching if she wanted it, and he made clear that he did not think her voice needed fixing, only supporting, a dedicated songwriting space, a producer, a small but skilled team, showcases at Park-owned venues and hotels across the country, full funding. And here was the part that made Clarabelle's breath catch. She would keep full ownership of her music. Complete creative control. The deal was structured so that even if she walked away tomorrow, she lost nothing. Clarabelle looked at the documents Priya laid out in front of her. She looked at the conference room and the desert through the windows and the man sitting across from her who had bought an entire hotel chain to defend her honor and was now offering to build her a stage. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "You heard me sing one time." Minjun looked at her directly. "Some things do not need to be heard twice." He paused, and the pause was heavier than anything he had said. "The fact that you have been singing in a 40-seat lounge with no agent, no manager, and no one fighting for you is a failure of everyone who has ever heard your voice. I do not want to own your talent. I want to make sure the world gets to hear it." Priya walked her through the contract. Line by line, clause by clause, it was clean, fair, transparent. Priya told her she should have her own lawyer review it and that Park Capital would cover the cost of that review. There were no hidden terms, no traps. Clarabelle signed. She walked out of the building with Priya at her side, blinking in the Arizona sunlight, feeling like the ground under her feet had shifted from sand to concrete. For the first time in her adult life, something solid was beneath her. She did not see the black sedan parked across the street. She did not see the man inside it watching her through tinted windows. Yoon Hae-sung, 30 years old, Korean-American, handsome in a sharp, angular way that looked polished on camera and predatory in person. The son of Yoon Tae-sik, patriarch of the Yoon family and head of a rival conglomerate that had been circling the Park empire for years. Hae-sung watched Clarabelle walk out of Park Capital Group's headquarters. He did not know who she was, but he noted her face, her posture, the way Minjun's assistant had personally walked her to her car. He made a phone call. "Find out who she is," he said. "Find out what she means to him." 3 months changed everything, but the story was not a fairy tale. It was a grind. Clarabelle relocated to Scottsdale. Her apartment was small and modest, chosen by her, not assigned. Minjun had offered her something larger, but she had shaken her head and said she wanted something that felt like hers. She picked a one-bedroom unit near the Park Capitol campus with white walls and a window that caught the desert sunrise. She put her mother's broken watch on the nightstand and hung a framed photo of Lorraine above the kitchen sink, and it felt like home. She worked every single day. Her vocal coach was a retired Broadway performer named Dolores, a woman in her 60s with silver locks and zero patience for excuses. Dolores did not coddle Clarabelle. She pushed her. She made her run scales until her throat burned. She made her sing the same 8 bars 40 times until the breath support was right. But she also told Clarabelle, on the 3rd day, that she had one of the most naturally gifted instruments she had heard in 40 years, and that her job was not to change it, but to make sure it lasted a lifetime. Clarabelle wrote songs in a studio that had better equipment than anything she had ever touched, a keyboard that did not stick, a microphone that captured every texture of her voice, soundproof walls, a producer named Marcus who let her work at her own pace and never once tried to push her towards something more commercial. She wrote about her mother, about loneliness, about the cafe, about standing up after being knocked down, about the terrifying hope of being seen. Her first public showcase was at the Park Grand, a luxury hotel in Beverly Hills, a private audience of industry people, investors, and influencers. Clarabelle stood backstage and her hands shook so badly she could not button her jacket. She nearly canceled. She told Priya she was not ready. Priya looked at her and said, "You have been ready your whole life. You just did not have the stage." She walked out. The room was intimate, maybe 100 people. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, the kind of audience that had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. Clarabelle opened her mouth and sang. Within 30 seconds, the room belonged to her. A woman in the 2nd row stopped mid-sip and set her champagne down like it had gone flat compared to what she was hearing. A music executive in the back leaned forward in his chair and did not lean back for the rest of the set. By the time Clarabelle finished her 4th song, 3 different label representatives had cornered Priya asking who she was, where she came from, and how quickly they could set up a meeting. Someone in the audience filmed her final song on their phone. The video was uploaded that night. Within 72 hours, it had 4 million views. The comments section became a cathedral. "Who is this woman?" "I am crying in my car at a gas station. Her voice just healed something in me. She is the real thing. You can hear it. How have I never heard of her?" Media picked it up. A major profile ran online with a headline, "The waitress with the voice of a generation." They told her story. The cafe, the slap, the mysterious businessman who intervened, the rise from a 40-seat lounge in West Palm Beach to a stage in Beverly Hills. The public fell in love with her. She was real. She was humble. She was not manufactured. People rooted for her the way they root for someone who has been overlooked for too long and is finally getting what they deserve. Minjun watched her rise from a careful distance. He and Clarabelle had spent time together over these 3 months, but always in the margins, always in the spaces between work. Dinners after late studio sessions at a quiet restaurant he liked in Old Town Scottsdale. Walks through the desert at sunset where the sky turned colors that did not seem real. Long conversations about their childhoods. She told him about Lorraine, how her mother worked as a hotel housekeeper for 23 years, how she sang gospel in the kitchen every morning before dawn and never once complained about being tired, how she died with cracked hands and a full heart and Clarabelle had held her hand in the hospital and promised her that she would keep singing. He told her about his father, Park Sung-ho, who built the family empire from nothing in Seoul through sheer willpower and brilliant strategy, about the pressure of carrying that legacy, about the loneliness of being the person everyone depends on but no one truly knows. There was a connection growing between them. It was not rushed. It was not physical. It was built on something deeper, 2 people who understood what it meant to carry weight in silence, but neither of them named it. They orbited each other with a gravitational pull they both felt and neither acknowledged, both afraid that saying it out loud would shatter it. Meanwhile, the Yoon family made their first move. Hae-sung had done his research. He now knew exactly who Clarabelle was and, more importantly, what she was beginning to mean to Minjun. He could read the signs. Not from public displays, because Min-jun was far too disciplined for that, but from the patterns. The resources allocated to her development. The personal attention from the CEO of a billion-dollar empire. The way Min-jun's schedule had quietly reorganized itself around her existence. Hae-sung met with his father, Tae-sik, in their family's offices in New York City. Tae-sik was in his 60s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and possessed of a strategic mind that could dismantle a competitor without raising his pulse. He listened to his son's report and nodded slowly. The Park family's expansion into entertainment is a vulnerability, Tae-sik said. It is emotional, it is personal, and personal investments make powerful men sloppy. Get close to the girl. Do not hurt her. Not yet. Create a crack, a fracture, something that makes Park Min-jun lose his focus. Hae-sung flew to Los Angeles and arranged to casually appear at a music industry mixer that Clarabelle attended with Priya. He introduced himself as an independent music investor interested in supporting emerging artists. He was charming, attentive, and precisely calibrated to make Clarabelle feel comfortable without setting off her alarms. Clarabelle was friendly but measured. Something about him felt too polished, like a surface that had been sanded until all the texture was gone. She mentioned him to Priya afterward. Priya ran his name through Park Capital's intelligence network and came back with a face that said trouble. Yoon Hae-sung, son of Yoon Tae-sik, direct rival of the Park family. Clarabelle's stomach dropped. What do I do? Stay away from him. Clarabelle agreed, but the encounter planted something she did not expect. Not attraction to Hae-sung, doubt about Min-jun. She lay in bed that night and the questions crept in like water through cracks. Was she a person to Min-jun or an asset? Was the deal about her talent, or was it about something else? Was she an artist or a chess piece in a game she did not understand? She did not voice these doubts, but they sat in her chest like stones, and they were getting heavier. Hae-sung was patient. He played a longer game. Since Clarabelle had not responded to his direct approach, he changed tactics. He launched a whisper campaign. Through contacts in the music and media world, he planted a narrative so precisely crafted that it spread like a virus through industry gossip channels and onto social media. The narrative was simple and poisonous. Park Min-jun was not investing in Clarabelle because of her talent. He was investing in her because he was infatuated with her. The development deal was not a legitimate business venture. It was a personal indulgence. A billionaire saw a pretty waitress and decided to play savior. She was not an artist. She was a trophy. The narrative spread. Gossip blogs ran blind items that were barely blind. Social media turned. The same comment sections that had celebrated Clarabelle weeks earlier now swarmed with cruelty. She slept her way into that deal. Her voice is all studio tricks. Without his money, she is nothing. Gold digger energy, classic. He is literally buying her a career. Wake up. It was coordinated, vicious, and relentless. Clarabelle read the comments. She knew she should not. Every article she had ever read about public life said the same thing. Do not read the comments. But she read them the way a person touches a wound, compulsively, needing to know how deep it goes. Each comment reopened something she had been carrying since childhood. The belief that she was not enough, that she did not belong, that any good thing in her life was borrowed, temporary, something she would inevitably be asked to return. She pulled away from Min-jun, slowly at first. A canceled dinner with a reasonable excuse, a delayed response to his messages, then more obviously. When they did speak, her warmth was gone, replaced by a careful politeness that was worse than anger because at least anger is honest. Min-jun noticed immediately. He did not push. Pushing was not in his nature. But the shift unsettled him in a way that surprised him, because Min-jun was a man who controlled everything in his world, and this was something he could not control. He asked Priya if something had happened. Priya pulled up the articles, the social media posts, the gossip threads. She laid them out on the conference table like evidence. Min-jun went very still. The kind of still that, in his world, meant someone had made a serious miscalculation. Trace the source, he said. Within days, Deho's team identified the origin. A PR firm in Manhattan, on retainer with the Yoon family. Minjun's fury was cold and contained. He did not raise his voice. He did not break anything. He sat in his office in Scottsdale and looked out at the desert and planned with the methodical patience of a man who understood that revenge is most effective when it is precise. But before he could act, something worse happened. Clarabelle had her biggest performance yet, a solo showcase at a major venue in San Francisco. Label heads, streaming executives, entertainment journalists, and media from every major outlet. This was the event that could launch her from viral sensation to legitimate national artist. 8 songs, 1 night, everything on the line. 15 minutes before she walked on stage, her phone buzzed with an anonymous email. Attached were documents, internal park capital memos or what appeared to be internal memos. They showed Clarabelle's development deal coded as Project Songbird and categorized under a budget line called Personal Expenditures of CEO. The implication was devastating. Her entire deal was off the books, not a legitimate business investment, a personal indulgence, a rich man's pet project. The documents were fabricated, every single one. Haesung had hired a document specialist to create them. The formatting was perfect. The internal codes looked authentic. The email headers appeared to come from Park Capital's own servers. Clarabelle did not know any of this. She sat in the dressing room backstage and read the documents and felt the ground dissolve beneath her feet. Everything she had feared was confirmed in black and white. She was not a real artist. She was a line item in a rich man's personal budget. The deal was never about her voice. It was about her. She walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding, 300 people in the audience. She gripped the microphone and sang the first song. She made it through. Barely. Her voice wavered on the high notes, but she held it together through sheer force of will. The second song, she opened her mouth. The first verse was fine. The chorus came, and her voice broke. Not a technical failure, an emotional collapse. The note cracked and splintered, and she stopped singing. She stood under the lights with 300 people staring at her, and the silence was so loud it felt like pressure against her skin. Tears came. She could not stop them. She whispered an apology into the microphone. She set it gently on the stand. She turned and walked off stage. The murmur that rose from the audience sounded like a wave. Phones came out. Within minutes, the video of Clarabelle walking off stage was on every platform, spreading with the cruel efficiency of content that feeds on someone else's pain. Minjun had been watching from the back of the venue. The moment she left the stage, he moved. He pushed through the crowd. Deho cleared a path. They found her in a dressing room, sitting on the cold floor, holding the printed emails in her shaking hands. She looked up at him. Her makeup was streaked. Her eyes were red and raw and filled with something that was not just pain but betrayal. She asked him one question. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Am I a project, or am I a person to you? Minjun stood in the doorway, and for the first time in the entire story, his composure cracked. Not anger, not authority. Pain. Because the one person in the world whose opinion actually mattered to him had just asked him if any of it was real. Minjun did not answer her question, not right away. Instead, he did something that Clarabelle did not expect. This man who ran a billion-dollar empire, who commanded boardrooms and bent markets, and stood with the posture of someone who had never once been uncertain of his place in the world, walked into that dressing room and sat down on the floor across from her. He lowered himself to her level, he looked at her directly, and he told her the truth, all of it. He told her the documents were fake. He told her about Haesung, about the Yoon family, about the Whisper campaign. He told her that Project Songbird did not exist, that her deal was fully legitimate, processed through the entertainment division, approved by the board, documented with complete transparency. He told her she could audit every record. He would open every file. Then he said something she was not prepared for. He told her about his mother. Jae-yeon. She had been a classical pianist, brilliant, gifted in the way that comes along once in a generation. But she had given up her career to support Sung-ho's business ambitions. She set aside her music to raise Minjun and Soo-yeon, to host the dinners and attend the functions and be the perfect wife of a man building an empire. She never performed again. She died when Minjun was 19, and one of the things that haunted him most was that the world never heard her play. He had recordings. Private ones. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Jaeyeon would sit at the piano and play Chopin with a kind of feeling that made the walls weep. But no one heard it. Her gift lived and died inside the walls of their home. When he heard Clarabelle sing that night outside the Indigo Room, he heard what he wished the world had heard from his mother. A talent so pure and so powerful that letting it go unheard would have been a crime he could not live with. "I did not invest in you because you are beautiful," he said. "I did not do it because I am obsessed. I did not do it to play hero. I did it because your voice deserves to be heard, and because letting it disappear the way my mother's did would have been something I could not forgive myself for." Then he said the part that broke the wall between them. "Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about your voice." His hands were clasped in front of him, and she noticed for the first time that they were shaking slightly. "You became the part of my day that felt human. Every dinner, every conversation, every moment with you was the only time I was not performing the role of Park Min-jun, CEO. With you, I was just Min-jun. And that terrified me, because in my world, caring about someone is the fastest way to hand your enemies a weapon." Clarabelle listened. She did not interrupt. The dressing room was quiet except for the muffled hum of the venue being cleared outside. When he finished, she was silent for a long time, processing, weighing. Then she said, "You should have told me about the Yoon family. You should have told me I was being used as a pawn in a war I did not even know was happening. I deserved to know what I was walking into." She was right, and Min-jun knew it. "You are right," he said. "I was trying to protect you by keeping you separate from that world. That was wrong." "Protection without honesty is just another form of control," Clarabelle said, and the sentence landed like a verdict. The moment was heavy. The air in the room was dense with everything that had been said and everything that was still hanging between them. But it was also the moment where they stopped circling each other. Min-jun asked her what she wanted to do. He gave her a choice: walk away, keep the music, keep the EP she had been working on, owe him nothing, he would make sure of it, or stay, knowing everything, with full transparency, and decide for herself what she wanted this to be. Clarabelle looked at the floor, then at the printed emails in her lap, then at him. "I have been running my whole life," she said. Her voice was steady now, quiet but certain. "From grief, from poverty, from people who told me I was not enough. I am done running. I am going to stay. I am going to finish what I started. And if the Yoon family wants to come for me, they are going to have to deal with the fact that I am not a pawn. I am a person. And I have a voice that the world is going to hear whether they like it or not." Min-jun looked at her, and in his eyes was something that went beyond admiration. It was the look of a man who had just realized he was falling in love with someone who might be stronger than he was. That night, for the first time, he reached for her hand. She took it. They sat on the cold dressing room floor, hand in hand, surrounded by the debris of the worst night of her career, and they said nothing. It was the quietest moment in the story, and the most powerful. Somewhere in a hotel room across San Francisco, Hae-sung watched the walk-off video go viral and smiled. He called his father. "The girl is finished," he said. "Min-jun's entertainment expansion is over." He had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks after San Francisco, the media narrative was that Clarabelle had crumbled, that the pressure had been too much, that the waitress-to-singer story was a nice fairy tale that had collapsed under the weight of reality. Clarabelle was back in Scottsdale. She was hurt, but she was not broken. There is a difference, and Clarabelle knew it because she had learned the difference from Lorraine, who worked double shifts on sprained ankles and still sang in the kitchen at dawn. She wrote every day. She poured everything into new songs: the humiliation, the betrayal, the fear, the strength she had found sitting on that dressing room floor holding the hand of a man who sat down because he did not want her to feel alone. These songs were different from what she had written before. They were not gentle. They were fierce, raw, stripped to the bone. Songs about survival, about being underestimated, about standing up after the world shoves you down and dusting off your knees. She recorded a 5-song EP in 4 days. No studio tricks, no auto-tune, just her voice, a keyboard, and a microphone in a room with the lights turned low. She called the EP Still Here. Min-jun, meanwhile, moved with the precision of a surgeon. First, he deployed his legal team. They compiled evidence of the fabricated documents and the coordinated smear campaign, every forged memo, every traced IP address, every payment from the Yoon family's accounts to the PR firm that had planted the story. They packaged the evidence and presented it to a journalist at a major national publication, not as a press release, as a story. The journalist spent a week verifying independently, bringing in cybersecurity experts who confirmed the emails were manufactured and the documents were forgeries. The article published under the headline, "Inside the Smear Campaign Against America's Most Talked About New Artist and the Rival Family Behind It." It named the Yoon family's PR firm. It traced the fabricated documents. It included expert testimony. It was meticulous and devastating. The article went viral. Public opinion swung violently. The same people who had called Clarabelle a gold digger were now flooding comment sections with apologies and support. "We failed her. We all failed her. Protect Clarabelle at all costs. I am so ashamed of what I said about this woman." Major artists publicly backed her. A Grammy-winning singer posted a video from her living room, looking directly into the camera and said, "I walked off stage once too. It does not make you weak. It makes you human. Clarabelle, we see you. We are with you." Second, Min Jun made a calculated business move. He did not try to destroy the Yoon family outright. That would have started a war that could damage the Park empire as well. Instead, he targeted their most vulnerable American asset, a major luxury real estate development project in Naperville, Illinois. The Yoon family was building a mixed-use complex there that was the centerpiece of their U.S. expansion. Min Jun quietly acquired the 3 parcels of land surrounding the development site, every single one. Without those parcels, the Yoon project had no access easements, no road access, no utility connections. The development was effectively landlocked. Construction stalled overnight. Investors panicked. Phone calls went unanswered. The Yoon family was forced to the negotiating table. Min Jun's terms were simple and non-negotiable. A formal public apology from the Yoon family to Clarabelle, a retraction of the fabricated documents, and a binding legal agreement to cease all interference with Park Capital's operations and personnel. T-Sick was humiliated, but he was also a pragmatist. The Naperville project represented hundreds of millions of dollars. He issued the apology through a formal press statement. He signed the agreement. He did what he had to do. Hae-sung was furious. He felt emasculated by his father's surrender. T-Sick, in turn, blamed Hae-sung for the entire disaster. Their relationship fractured. Hae-sung was sidelined from major decisions. He became more dangerous because his motivations were no longer strategic. They were personal. But that was a problem for later. Right now, the spotlight was on Clarabelle. Her EP, Still Here, dropped on streaming platforms the same week the exposé published. It debuted at #1 on 3 different charts. The lead track, Don't Look Down, became an anthem. It was everywhere: morning shows, TikTok, Instagram stories, workout playlists, car rides, late-night headphone sessions where people cried alone in the dark and felt less alone because of it. Music critics who had never heard of her were calling her the most exciting new voice in a decade. Clarabelle watched the numbers climb from her kitchen counter in Scottsdale, eating cereal from a chipped bowl, her phone in one hand. When Don't Look Down hit #1, she set the bowl down and cried. Not sad tears, release tears. The kind that come when you realize you survived the thing you thought would end you. That night, Min Jun sent her a single text message. "The world is hearing you now. Your mother would be proud." She read it 17 times. Clarabelle's career did not just grow, it erupted. She performed on a late-night television show, and the video trended for 3 days. She was offered a headlining slot at a major music festival. She signed a distribution deal, on her own terms, with full ownership, through a label that understood they were not buying her but partnering with her. Priya was fielding calls from brands, managers, and promoters around the clock. Every major magazine wanted a cover story. Every podcast wanted an interview. Clarabelle was no longer the waitress who got slapped. She was an artist, a force. And she and Min Jun were together. Not publicly, not yet. But privately, their relationship had deepened into something real and consuming and terrifying in the best possible way. He flew to wherever she was performing when his schedule allowed. She came back to Scottsdale between shows. They cooked together in his penthouse kitchen, and they were both spectacularly bad at it, which became a running joke. He once burned rice so badly, the smoke alarm went off and D-Ho burst through the door with his hand inside his jacket, before realizing it was just jasmine rice turned to charcoal. They argued about small things. He was too controlling about her security detail. She was too reckless about walking around alone in cities at night. He wanted to assign her a full-time bodyguard. She told him she had walked home alone in West Palm Beach for years, and she was not about to start living in a bubble because she could sing. They went back and forth until they found a compromise that satisfied neither of them, which is how they knew it was fair. They had quiet moments. Sitting on the rooftop terrace of his building in Scottsdale, watching the desert sky turn from blue to gold to purple to black, not speaking, just being near each other. She would lean her shoulder against his, and he would not move, would barely breathe, as if any movement might break the spell. He introduced her to Soo-yeon via video call. Soo-yeon took one look at Clarabelle, heard her laugh, and immediately decided this was the greatest woman who had ever lived. She asked Clarabelle about her music, her mother, her favorite food, whether Min-jun was being sufficiently attentive, and whether she knew that he had slept with a stuffed tiger until he was 14. Min-jun attempted to end the call. Soo-yeon ignored him. After the call, Soo-yeon texted her brother in Korean. "If you mess this up, I will fly to Arizona and handle you myself." Min-jun laughed. A rare, genuine, unguarded laugh that Clarabelle heard from the next room and stored in her memory like a precious thing. But Hae-sung was not finished. Having been publicly humiliated and privately sidelined by his father, Hae-sung was operating alone now. The family resources were cut off. The strategic support was gone. What remained was a man consumed by obsession. In his distorted logic, Clarabelle was the variable that had ruined everything. If Min-jun had never met her, Hae-sung's plan would have worked. She was the reason his father looked at him with contempt. She was the reason the Yoon family had been forced to kneel. He devised one final scheme, not a business attack, something more personal. He hired a private investigator to dig into Clarabelle's past, every corner of it. The pie was thorough. He found school records, old addresses, social services files, and he found something significant. Wendell, Clarabelle's father. Wendell had abandoned the family when Clarabelle was 7. He had walked out the front door on a Tuesday morning and never came back. No explanation, no goodbye, just an empty chair at the kitchen table and a little girl who spent the next 2 decades wondering what she had done wrong. Wendell was alive, living in Reno, Nevada, working odd jobs, carrying decades of guilt like a stone tied around his neck. He had been following Clarabelle's rise from a distance, watching her videos on his cracked phone in his rented room, too ashamed to reach out, too broken to believe he had the right. Hae-sung contacted Wendell. He posed as a journalist writing a feature on Clarabelle's story. He manipulated him with precision, playing on his guilt, telling him that Clarabelle had spoken publicly about wanting to reconnect with her father. She had not. Hae-sung convinced Wendell to come to Clarabelle's next major performance, a sold-out concert at a prestigious venue in Bellevue, Washington, to surprise her on stage. Hae-sung's plan was surgical. He would have cameras positioned to capture Clarabelle's reaction when she saw the man who had broken her heart walking toward her on the biggest night of her career. He wanted to shatter her publicly, one more time, for good. The night of the Bellevue concert, 3,000 seats, sold out. The venue hummed with anticipation. Min-jun was in the front row, right side, with D-Ho and 2 security personnel. Clarabelle took the stage in a fitted black dress with her natural hair out, her coils catching the light like a crown. She was radiant, confident. She opened with "Don't Look Down," and the crowd surged to their feet. She moved through her set with power and grace and the kind of stage presence that cannot be taught. She was not the woman who had walked off stage in San Francisco. She was someone who had gone through fire and come out singing louder. Halfway through the show, between songs, Clarabelle looked into the audience to catch her breath, and she saw a face she had not seen in 17 years. Wendell, her father, standing in the aisle near the back of the venue, older than she remembered. Thinner, gray at the temples, wearing clothes that did not fit quite right and holding a small bouquet of sunflowers. her mother's favorite flower. Clarabelle's breath stopped. The arena went quiet. 3,000 people could feel the shift in the air, even though they did not understand it. She stood on that stage with the microphone in her hand and stared at the ghost of her childhood. Near the exits, Hae-sung's camera crew was positioned and ready. This was the moment. The breakdown, the collapse, the end of Clarabelle. But Clarabelle did not break. She stood on that stage and looked at the man who had left her, and something rose up inside her that was not anger and was not pain. It was something older and deeper and stronger than both of those things. It was the voice of Lorraine, singing in the kitchen at dawn, teaching her daughter by example that you can be hurt and still be whole. She spoke into the microphone. Her voice was calm and clear and carried to every seat in the house. "There is someone in this audience I have not seen in a very long time," she said. "I have spent years being angry, years being hurt, years wondering why I was not enough for him to stay. I am not going to stand up here and pretend that pain is gone. It is not. But I have learned something this year. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to feel it. I do not know if I am ready to forgive, but I am ready to stop letting the wound define me." Then she sang. An unreleased song, one she had written in secret, late at night in her apartment that even Min-jun had never heard. It was called Sunflower. It was about a little girl who watched her father walk out the front door on a Tuesday morning and spent the next 20 years wondering what she did wrong. The verses were quiet and aching and unbearably honest. And the chorus was a revelation. It was about realizing that his leaving was never about her. It was always about him. And she was not that little girl anymore. 3,000 people wept, openly, without shame. The woman next to Min-jun was sobbing into her hands. A man 6 rows back had his arm around his teenage daughter and they were both crying. Min-jun sat perfectly still, his jaw tight, his eyes shining, watching the woman he loved turn her deepest wound into the most beautiful thing anyone in that room had ever heard. Hae-sung's camera crew filmed everything, but there was nothing to exploit. No breakdown, no collapse, no drama, just a woman standing in a spotlight, singing the truth and making 3,000 strangers feel like they were not alone. After the show, backstage, Wendell approached. He was shaking. He tried to speak and the words came out broken and wet. He tried to explain. He tried to apologize for 20 years of absence in 60 seconds. Clarabelle listened. She did not hug him. She was not ready for that. But she told him she heard him. And she told him that if he wanted to be in her life, it had to be real. No more running. No more disappearing. He nodded. He could barely see through his tears. "I will be here," he said. "I am not going anywhere." It was not a fairy tale reunion. It was messy and honest and unfinished, but it was a beginning. Min-jun found Clarabelle after Wendell left. She was alone in the dressing room, sitting on the couch with her shoes off and her head back, and the kind of exhaustion on her face that comes from giving everything and having nothing left. He sat beside her. She leaned her head onto his shoulder. "I think I just sang the hardest song I will ever sing," she said. "And you did not miss a note," he said. Meanwhile, D-Ho's security team traced Hae-sung's involvement in bringing Wendell to the concert. They documented everything. The phone calls, the fake journalist cover, the hired camera crew. Min-jun now had irrefutable proof that Hae-sung had acted independently, in direct violation of the binding agreement his own family had signed. The consequences would be severe. 6 months later, Madison Square Garden, New York City, 20,000 seats, sold out. Clarabelle stood backstage and pressed her palms flat against the wall and breathed. She could feel the rumble of 20,000 people through the concrete. 20,000 voices, 20,000 heartbeats, all waiting for her. She thought about the Indigo Room, 40 people, mismatched chairs, a microphone stand with a loose screw, Miss Doreen by the door, Reggie behind the bar, a $9 thrift store dress, and a voice that no one had ever heard outside a room the size of a living room. She thought about the cafe in Palm Beach, the broken glass, the slap, the silence of 50 people who did nothing, and the one man who stood up. In the 6 months since Bellevue, the world had shifted beneath her feet. Hae-sung had been confronted with the evidence. Min-jun did not destroy him. He gave the evidence to Tae-sik directly. The old man, despite his rivalry with the Park family, was horrified that his son had targeted a civilian, an artist, a woman in a personal vendetta. Taesik formally removed Haesung from all family business operations and issued a personal, handwritten apology to Clarabelle. Haesung, stripped of his family's name and support, eventually checked into a treatment program to address the psychological issues that had been festering beneath his obsession for years. His story did not end neatly, but he was out of Clarabelle's life. Her EP, Still Here, had gone platinum. She had been nominated for 2 major music awards. Her face had been on magazine covers. She had done interviews where she spoke openly about everything. The cafe, the slap, the rise, the smear campaign, the comeback. She never named Minjun as her partner in public. She kept that part of her life protected with a ferocity that made reporters stop asking. But everyone knew, and everyone respected her for guarding it. Her relationship with Wendell was slow, careful, and real. He had moved from Reno to a small apartment in Scottsdale. They had dinner once a week. Sometimes the conversation flowed, and sometimes it stumbled into painful silences. He was learning how to be present. She was learning how to let him. It was not easy. Forgiveness never is. But he showed up every single time, and Clarabelle was beginning to understand that showing up is its own form of love. She had used her growing platform and resources to establish the Lorraine Foundation, named after her mother, which funded music education programs and performance spaces in underserved communities across the country. The first space the foundation opened was in West Palm Beach, in the same building where the Indigo Room used to be. She called it the Lorraine Room. Reggie was hired to manage it. When she gave him the keys at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, he held them against his chest and cried without making a sound. Miss Doreen was in the front row, wearing her best dress again, clapping so hard her palms turned red. Now, Madison Square Garden. The lights went down. 20,000 people held their breath. Clarabelle walked onto the stage in a simple white dress. No pyrotechnics, no backup dancers, no elaborate production, just her, a microphone, and a single white spotlight that followed her to center stage. She looked out at the sea of faces, phones held up like candles, signs that said "Still Here," a section near the back chanting her name. She smiled, not the nervous, uncertain smile from her early shows, the smile of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. She performed for 90 minutes. Every song told a piece of her story. The crowd sang along to "Don't Look Down" so loudly that her voice was almost drowned out, and she laughed into the microphone and let them carry the chorus. They cried during "Sunflower." They danced during the upbeat tracks she had written about joy, about survival, about finding yourself in the wreckage of everything you thought you needed. For her final song, she stopped. She held the microphone in both hands and looked out at the audience and spoke. "A year and a half ago," she said, "I was a waitress who got slapped in a cafe in Palm Beach, and I did not think I deserved better. I thought that was just what life looked like for someone like me. Small rooms, small life, head down, do not make trouble." She paused. Then someone saw me, not looked at me, saw me, and instead of feeling sorry for me, he did something about it. The arena was so quiet she could hear the ventilation system humming. I spent a long time wondering if I earned any of this, or if it was given to me, and I finally figured out the answer. She smiled. "It is both. My talent was always mine, but having someone believe in it, having someone fight for it, that was a gift I will never take for granted." She looked toward the front row, right side, 3 seats in. Minjun was there, dark suit, calm posture, hands resting on his knees. His expression was composed, controlled, disciplined, but his eyes were shining under the lights. Diho sat 1 seat behind him, scanning the crowd out of habit even though there was nothing to scan for. The war was over. The only thing left was this. Clarabelle sang the final song directly to him. It was new, unreleased. No one had heard it. It was called The Quiet One. It was about a man who speaks softly, but moves mountains. A man who does not shout or posture or perform his power for an audience. A man who sits on a cold floor because he does not want someone to feel alone. A man who heard a voice through an open door and stopped walking. A man who told a woman that the world deserved her voice and then spent every day proving he meant it. The melody was simple. The lyrics were direct. There was nothing clever or tricky about the song. It was honest in the way that only the most beautiful things are honest. Stripped of pretense, stripped of armor, just truth set to music, offered without condition. 20,000 people watched Park Min-jun, one of the most powerful businessmen in the world, press his hand to his mouth and look down at his lap because he could not hold it together. Soo-yeon, watching on a live stream from Seoul, was already in tears. Di-ho, who had not shown visible emotion in 12 years of service, blinked several times in rapid succession and stared very hard at the ceiling. The song ended. The arena erupted. The sound was not just applause. It was something bigger. Recognition. Celebration. The collective roar of 20,000 people who had followed this story from a cafe in Palm Beach to the biggest stage in the world and were standing on their feet because the woman they were watching had earned every single second of this moment. Clarabelle stood in the spotlight with tears on her face and her arms at her sides, and she let the sound wash over her. She let herself feel it, all of it. The joy and the grief and the gratitude and the disbelief and the bone-deep knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. After the show, backstage, the arena emptied. The lights came down. 20,000 people filtered out into the New York night and carried her voice home with them. Clarabelle was in the dressing room, still in her white dress. Barefoot now, her shoes kicked off in the corner. The adrenaline was fatting and the exhaustion was setting in, and she sat on the couch and closed her eyes and listened to the silence. Min-jun walked in. Di-ho closed the door behind him and stood guard outside. It was just the two of them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of every moment that had led to this one. The cafe, the broken glass, the sidewalk outside the Indigo Room, the conference room in Scottsdale, the dressing room floor in San Francisco, the rooftop in the desert, the burned rice and the smoke alarm and the arguments about security details and the quiet, holy evenings watching the sky change color. Min-jun spoke first, and he said something he had never said to anyone. "I love you, Clarabelle," not in Korean, not in a grand gesture, in plain, simple English. "I have loved you since you stood in that cafe with your hand on your cheek and refused to cry in front of a man who did not deserve your tears." Clarabelle opened her eyes. She looked at this man. This quiet, disciplined, terrifying, tender man who had rearranged the world for her and asked for nothing in return. She stood up. She crossed the room. She took his face in her hands and kissed him. It was their first kiss. It was soft and slow, and it carried the weight of everything. Every doubt, every fear, every silent evening, every song she had written with his face in her mind. His hands found her waist and hers stayed on his face, and the kiss lasted long enough for the rest of the world to disappear entirely. When they pulled apart, she kept her hands where they were and looked at him from inches away. "For the record," she said, "I loved you first. I loved you the night you walked into my lounge and did not say a word. You just listened. Nobody had ever just listened." He smiled, a real smile, not the controlled, diplomatic expression he showed the world. A real, open, vulnerable, beautiful smile. And Clarabelle thought that if she never sang another note in her life, the memory of that smile would be enough. The months that followed unfolded like a song, finding its final verse. Min-jun at the opening of the Lorraine Foundation's second location in Scottsdale, watching Clarabelle cut the ribbon and give a speech about her mother that made everyone in the audience cry, including Di-ho, who would deny it to his grave. Clarabelle at a Park family dinner in Seoul, sitting across from Park Sung-ho, who was intimidating until she made him laugh with a story about burning rice. And then he laughed so hard he had to take off his glasses and wipe his eyes. Soo-yeon grabbing Clarabelle's hand under the table and whispering, "You are my sister now. It is decided. He does not get a vote." Min-jun in the front row of an awards ceremony, watching Clarabelle accept a major music award. She stood at the podium and thanked her mother and her team and the regulars at the Indigo Room and Miss Doreen and Reggie. Then she said, "And to the quiet one who believed in me before anyone else, you know who you are." The camera caught Min-jun shaking his head slightly with a small, private smile. Social media exploded. Clarabelle and Wendell sitting on a park bench in Scottsdale on a Sunday afternoon, eating ice cream in silence. Not because they had nothing to say, because they had finally learned that sometimes presence is enough. He came to every one of her local performances. He sat in the back and listened and cried every single time. She pretended not to notice. He pretended not to cry. They were both bad at pretending. It was perfect. And then, one evening, on the rooftop terrace in Scottsdale, where they had spent so many evenings watching the desert sky, the sun was setting. The light was gold and pink and turning everything soft. Clarabelle was sitting on the ledge, humming something new, something she was still working out, a melody that did not have words yet. Minjun sat beside her. He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small box. He did not get on one knee. That was not who they were. He sat beside her and opened the box and held it out. Inside was a ring. Simple, elegant. A single stone that caught the last light of the desert sun and threw tiny rainbows across her fingers. "I am not good at this," he said. His voice was steady, but barely. "I have never done this before. I have never wanted to do this before. But I want to spend the rest of my life sitting next to you while you hum songs that do not have words yet. And I want to be the first person who hears them when they do." Clarabelle looked at the ring. She looked at him. She looked at the desert sky behind him, painted in the same impossible colors that had been the backdrop of so many of their quiet evenings. She said yes. She did not say it loudly. She said it the way she said everything that mattered, softly, certainly, with her whole heart. He slid the ring onto her finger. She held her hand up and watched the stone catch the light. Then she leaned into him, and he put his arm around her, and they sat there, on the rooftop, as the sky turned from gold to purple to black, and the first stars appeared, and the world below them moved on without knowing that two people on a rooftop in Scottsdale had just promised each other forever. Weeks later, Clarabelle was back in Palm Beach, not as a waitress, as a customer. She sat at a table at the cafe on Worth Avenue, the same cafe where everything had begun. She ordered an espresso. The new waitress brought it with a smile. The cafe looked the same. The crystal glasses, the white linen, the quiet wealth. But Clarabelle was different. She was wearing a simple blouse and jeans. Her coils were out and natural and catching the sunlight. On her left hand was the ring, catching the light the way it had on the rooftop. She held a notebook open in front of her and a pen in her hand. She was writing a new song. The melody was in her head, and the words were coming slowly, the way the best words always do. She looked up from the notebook and out at Worth Avenue. The palm trees, the blue sky, the ocean somewhere beyond the buildings, steady and constant and unconcerned with the dramas of the people who lived beside it. She smiled. She took a sip of the espresso. She kept writing. Clarabelle was a waitress who got slapped by a bully in a cafe in Palm Beach, and the man who sat 3 tables away did not just defend her. He did not just give her an opportunity. He gave her something nobody had ever given her before, the belief that her voice mattered. And she spent the rest of her life proving him right.